The part you may have missed is that if the question is, did the business press institutionally provide adequate warnings to the public in the years prior to the crash, I'm going to answer in the negative. As I said, it's a 6,400 word piece. This is very nuanced, but I don't want to soft pedal it. Okay, and again, you haven't had a chance to read it, nor have you had a chance to look at this record, nor have you had a chance to do the research yourself, so I'm not going to make too much of something that hasn't been aired. However, so the travel of the piece is what I thought was some interesting observations. One was that I sort of break it down into 3 periods, and I thought was the best stuff was done was the first period between 2000, the period in question is January 1st, 2000 to June 30th, 2007. The idea was this is the time for warnings. After that, warnings were moved. Anyone can argue with the parameters they have. Those are ours. The first period, we found the best work. My definition of best work is our investigative stories of powerful institutions, basically, is what I'm looking for. Predatory lenders, and especially the Wall Street connection, the underwriting by the street. The second, and interestingly, the best work, as I say in the piece, was done in that 2000-2003 was a period, if you go back in time, it's very interesting that this was a period of great activism among regulators and policymakers and lawmakers and et cetera. And there was this, what I call this very useful symbiosis, or sorry, don't use the word in the piece, but this synergy between journalists and regulators results in great work. I say that the period between 2004 and through 06 was the most problematic because the coverage, I say, and I observe downshifts into good but not sufficient stories that I describe as service pieces that are very excellent and persistent warnings about housing prices in the bubble, and outstanding pieces about defective mortgage products, and great work about lending, but not great work about lenders. Final period, just to wrap up, is the end of 06 through the first half of 07, when my conclusion ends, my period ends. And this is where the press becomes fully alive to the looming dangers, and there's this massive material that begins to uncover the sort of catastrophe that we're sort of living in today. So that's the story, and maybe that'll help frame the discussion.
Thank you very much. Larry Ingrassia, would you like to go next?
Thanks, Paul. And I think this is an important subject for us to discuss because, of course, we all want to do the best job going forward that we can. I disagree fundamentally with Dean's conclusion. And he talked about the facts and also the interpretation of the facts. And I think those are 2 important things to take a look at. So in looking back over the record, particularly the record in the New York Times, and I'm sure that people will talk about other publications, maybe the readers and regulators were asleep, but reporters definitely were not asleep. And if you might indulge me, because Dean has made such a broad conclusion, I'd like to cite some stories that appeared in the New York Times well before 2007, just to give a flavor of the type of coverage. In March 2000, New York Times business reporter Diana Henriquez, here among us, worked on a joint investigative project with ABC News, revealing how predatory home equity loans were being diced into mortgage-backed securities and sold to investors by Lehman Brothers. The publicity drove the abusive mortgage company into bankruptcy, but it didn't awaken federal regulators. In August 2003, Gretchen Morgenson, one of our columnists, wrote a column headlined, "Mortgage Markets Are Out of Control." She warned about the huge mortgage-backed securities market, noting that the fact that so many players are heavily leveraged make a disaster almost inevitable. In June 2004, our chief economics reporter in Washington wrote a story headlined, "The Ever More Graspable and Risky American Dream," about the dangers of low-cash loans made to low-income homebuyers. He wrote, a kaleidoscopic array of mortgages for people with little cash threatened to push many buyers into default. In March 2005, Times reporters David Leonhardt and Motoko Rich wrote a front-page story headlined, "Trading Places, Real Estate Instead of .coms." And after reciting the many parallels, the story noted, another lingering echo of the stock market boom is the role of the Federal Reserve, the nation's central bank, in keeping interest rates too low. July 2005, headline, "Loose reins on galloping loans." Story warned that for 2 months now, federal banking regulators have signaled their discomfort about the explosive rise in risky mortgage loans, specifically no money down mortgages and liar's loans. August 2005, story headline, "Good news, bad news, your loan's approved." Eduardo Porter wrote, "Many first-time homebuyers are being pushed into the embrace of creative financing mortgages way beyond their budget. Quote, a decision that could well come back to haunt both them and the banks behind the loans later on." October 2004, "The Coming Nightmare of Home Ownership, question mark." June 2005, "The $1 trillion bet, homeowners take risk in a bid for lower mortgage payments." November 2005, "After the debt feast comes the heartburn." This was a Gretchen Morgensen column. The lead, "Does a financial train wreck lie ahead for American consumers and investors?" And I can assure you there are dozens and dozens more like this in the New York Times alone. And now we get to the interpretation, which I think is important. So, because I think Dean's conclusion is that if only the press had written even more, perhaps it would have been fixed. And again, I can disagree with that. And I'll cite the coverage of one of our competitors, the Wall Street Journal. Both the edit page and the news page is hammering on and on for probably the better part of this decade about Fannie and Freddie and the dangers of what it was doing. I'm not aware of anything that was done in Washington by regulators. On a related issue, the New York Times especially, but others, wrote a lot about excessive executive pay. We had a whole series a couple of years ago, but that was just the culmination of a lot of coverage. Again, I saw nobody taking that on, no regulator, no corporate boards. I don't know if we could have written any more than that. So could we have done better? Yes, you can always do better. But I think the record shows that the press was there laying the groundwork and kind of ringing the alarm bell.
Thank you, Larry. I'd now like to turn to Jane.